Hey guys, this is Justin at the Survivor Review, and with the Joker movie coming out soon, I wanted to take a look at one of the movies that hugely influenced it, the 1983 film from Martin Scorsese, The King of Comedy. Now this is a very underrated movie. It stars Robert De Niro and came out at the height of the Scorsese-De Niro collaboration era, right after Taxi Driver and Raging Bull. So I think this would have been like a huge hit, like a big movie, but it wasn't. It bombed at the box office and was forgotten about until recent times where it's starting to become reevaluated and a lot more appreciated than it was back then. And that's a great thing, because this movie is great. It's, in my opinion, one of Scorsese's best movies. It's just a fantastic film. It's a very different type of movie for Scorsese, especially at that time. At that time he was doing, really dark and violent type of movies. This movie has no violence in it. It's actually rated PG, and even though it does kind of have an underlining kind of like darker, more serious story to it, it's handled in a lighter, a little more comedic way. This isn't like a joke a minute type of movie. This isn't really like a jokey comedy. It's a dark comedy. So it's very different from a typical Scorsese movie, and just shows how much of a wide range he has as a filmmaker. I mean, especially as time went on with the type of movies he did later on that were a lot different than his usual fare. This one is also one of those on a kind of smaller scale, because like it's set in New York like his movies and everything, so it kind of feels like his movies. It's just the tone is different. It's very unique, especially for a Scorsese film. So the plot of this movie follows Rupert Pupkin, an aspiring stand-up comedian who's also not the most mentally stable, and his big dream is to have a guest spot on his favorite comedian Jerry Langford's talk show. And one night, while standing outside waiting for Jerry to exit the building after one of his shows, he kind of gets mobbed by fans and everything, and Rupert kind of fends him off, gets Jerry into his car, and at the last second jumps in with him. And so during the car ride, he kind of confesses how big of a fan he is, and your typical very kind of like awkward fan type of way, where it's kind of cringy and a little like uncomfortable. That's a word I'm going to be using a lot in this review, definitely. And he basically says, oh, I want to be a comedian just like you. I'd love to be on your show and everything. And Jerry, just trying to be nice and trying to get rid of him, is just like, yeah, like, call up my secretary, we'll figure something out. Well, Rupert takes that to heart, and basically, from that moment on, assumes that him and Jerry are friends, and he is guaranteed going to be on his show, and does everything that he can to make sure he appears on that show. He hangs out at Jerry's office just like all day, waiting to see him, or waiting to get his audition tape to him, and even when his secretary brings it back, rejecting him and saying like, oh, you just need a little more work, but you do have potential, even that's not good enough for him. Like, he still tries other ways to meet up with Jerry and get on his show, like to the point where he's breaking into his home, and his last ditch effort, the only way he could get on there is to kidnap Jerry and force them to put him on the show. So the performances in this movie are fantastic. Robert De Niro is great in this movie. This is like so different from the typical type of role that De Niro plays. This is just this kind of goofy, silly, like he has this huge ego, but you could tell that he doesn't know that he's in the wrong. This movie just shows how great of an actor De Niro is, because especially for that time, this is the exact opposite of a role that De Niro was playing, and he is so great and is perfect. He's like to a T this type of character, and he's hilarious. There's so many great funny moments in this movie with him. To me, the funniest stuff with him is when he's in his room, because basically he lives at home with his mom. And while he's there, he's constantly having these fantasies of, hanging out with Jerry, going to dinner with him, and, Jerry being like, hey, I just need you to take over the show for just 6 weeks, that's all. And, Rupert's like, I can't do that. And there's these moments while these fantasies are going on that his mom yells down to him all this time, and it's hilarious. Just to hear him, yelling back at his mom is just some of the funniest stuff in the movie.
What's the matter with you?
Mom!
Take it easy. Lower it.
I'm not gonna lower it. I have to do this now.
I don't mind you playing it, but lower it.
And then you have Jerry Lewis as Jerry Langford, who's great as well. When you think Jerry Lewis, you think over-the-top, kind of goofy, funny. And he doesn't play that at all. He plays a very subdued, very just kind of realistic portrayal of a comedian dealing with crazy fans. And he's great. He's very serious, actually, but he does it very well, and you buy him. Actually, he's really good as the talk show host. In fact, watching this, I'm like, Jerry Lewis probably could have been a really good talk show host. And like there's a great scene with them that apparently was pulled from real life of him like walking down the streets. There's people like waving at him and calling out his name, and the best moment is when he like walks past his phone booth and there's this lady on there just like, oh my god, hey, it's you, can you sign this for me, like I love your show. And then she's like, hey, like, can you talk to the other person on the line real quick? And I want you just to say something to him. And Jerry's like, oh, no, I gotta go. And she just immediately just changes her tone.
I'm sorry, I'm late.
You should only get cancer. I hope you get cancer.
It's just hilarious. It's just ridiculous. You also have the actress playing Rupert's friend, who's really great. Her character is also obsessed with Jerry, but for different reasons than Rupert. She's obsessed with Jerry because she like loves him and she's like infatuated with him, whereas Rupert is obsessed with Jerry for the fame. You could just tell that Rupert wants that fame. He wants to be famous and he wants to make up for, being this unknown like loser person. But his friend character, Marcia, is just obsessed with Jerry, and she's fantastic. There's these great moments with her at the end when they have Jerry tied up and it's just her alone, and she goes off on these like long tangents with him, and it's just engrossing and uncomfortable and just crazy. Now this movie is an exercise in uncomfortableness because every scene in this movie is just awkward. Just Rupert's persistence, his just non-stop trying to, be on Jerry's show, and he just goes to so many levels, like he never leaves, and he just like keeps going. You're like, dude, just stop, And then you have like the scenes where he's in Jerry's office, just like, oh, I'll wait for him, and he just sits down and just like, he can't see you right now, like we're busy, like you won't have time, you better be come back tomorrow. He's like, I'll wait just in case, and just kind of like sits there. And even the scene with the secretary like rejects him, and the first thing he says to her is like, are you speaking for Jerry? He's like, yeah, and he's like, no, I want to hear it from Jerry himself. And then there's this bartender who Rupert is in love with. He tells her that he is friends with Jerry and they're going to his place for like this party. And of course, that's not what's happening at all. He ends up getting into Jerry's place, and him and the girl are just kind of like waiting around there while the housekeepers are freaking out. They're like, what's this guy doing in this place? And they're trying to get Jerry in there, and they end up getting Jerry, and it's just this hugely awkward scene of Jerry just like, what are you doing in my house? Like, why are you here? This is trespassing. And that is probably the most uncomfortable scene in the movie, because you're just sitting there just like, oh, really, Rupert? Like, why would you do that?
Yeah, all right, so I made a mistake.
So did Hitler.
So that's what like a lot of this movie is. It's a lot of just uncomfortable scenes that just keep going and keep going, just to show how persistent and how like unstable Rupert really is. To me, the funniest scene in the movie is the scene where they kidnap Jerry and they put him on the phone to the studio to basically, tell him the ransom that like, Rupert has to be on the show or else Jerry's gonna get killed. And basically it's Rupert holding up these cue cards for Jerry to read off. And this just like is a good example of how the comedy is in this movie. It's not like over the top, it's not hitting you over the head with it, it's just very subtle, it's done very dryly. It's a very dry scene of just Rupert holding the cue cards and just Jerry just like kind of reading it off on the phone, just not even like scared for his life, just really annoyed that he's in this situation and just reading it off very slowly.
You got a blank card.
A really good bit of like physical comedy from Robert De Niro. It's not kooky and too silly, but still like really funny. It's just the awkward like weirdness of it that it's handled so well.
See me. Go back.
There's a lot of great dialogue in this movie, and that's where a lot of the good funny bits come from. There's a lot of like Rupert's dialogue of either him just like being egotistical and like the scenes where he's talking with the cops about his demands, and he's just saying it so calmly, and like after the cops are just like, you're basically under arrest after this point, he's like, okay, that's cool, but I think I need to get made up for the show. Like, just like totally oblivious to the fact that he kidnapped a person and is gonna go to jail because he's just like so into the moment that he's gonna be on this show and this is his goal and he's going to accomplish it, that he can care less about the repercussions of what he's done. It does get unsettling at times with just like how it handles the lust for fame or the lust like to be this person, okay, that's what the movie really is about, and it does that so well. And again, it gets kind of uncomfortable, it kind of gets under your skin really with how the fact that there are some people like that out there, like, who want that kind of stuff and will go through extreme lengths to try to achieve it. And that's basically what this movie is about, and it does it so well. This movie is comparable to Taxi Driver. It's actually a weirdly similar movie to that. It's basically kind of like the same type of story, but just handled in a very different way. Because both movies, like the base storyline is kind of similar, where it's this one person who's not mentally stable, and there's something happening that he wants to like change, but, you know, no one else is doing it for him, so he decides to act on his own. And, like, Rupert Pumpkin and Travis Bickle can be kind of comparable, even though they're, like, different type of characters, really. This movie is a good kind of companion piece to Taxi Driver, and there's a lot of kind of interesting, like, parallels, well, especially the ending. So the ending of this movie, this is a spoiler alert, and I know I don't really need to do a spoiler alert for a 30-year-old movie, but since this one isn't as well known as other films, I want to say spoiler alert here. The ending of the movie is similar to Taxi Driver, where it could be interpreted two ways, as either it really happened or it really didn't. Because the ending of this movie like almost plays off like a fantasy, and it could be comparable to the fantasies that Rupert has throughout the movie. He's constantly having these fantasies, like the one where he marries the bartender and everything. It's a weirdly optimistic and happy ending for his character. Just like how Taxi Driver ended with like a strangely optimistic ending for Travis Bickle after basically kidnapping Jerry and going on his show and delivering his stand-up routine and everything. He does get arrested, but after that he becomes super famous and ends up only serving 2 years of his 6-year term, ends up releasing an autobiography, becoming this hugely popular person, and the movie ends with him having his own stand-up show with like this audience cheering for him and everything. Like, everything just went perfectly for Rupert's. And that's the thing, you're like, okay, that could easily be a fantasy that he's having while sitting in prison. But you know what? With the way like society can be, with the way it kind of like warps things, like, that could actually happen. Like, I would buy that as the ending. It's very interesting. It really makes you think. So Taxi Driver, that is a great movie. That's not what I'm talking about. So The King of Comedy is a great, underrated movie with a fantastic against-type performance by Robert De Niro and a great performance by Jerry Lewis. It's just a very well put together, darkly comic movie that gets under your skin but still makes you laugh at times, and also just makes you uncomfortable at times as well. It's just blends those elements really well. It does a really good job of that and makes for an amazing movie that's definitely worth checking out. So, that's all I have to say for now, and until next time, I'll talk to you guys later.
But look, I figure it this way. Better to be king for a night than schmuck for a lifetime.